Welcome to the 12th and Blossom Art Club. Today's tutorial will involve these birch trees on these watercolor postcards. This is the design that I originally created, and of course on the right is the template ready to go. This is a really easy design to duplicate yourself on any size paper. It's 6 trees, so it's just really 12 straight lines with some branches scattered in. Now on the left, on my sample design, I've got this bluishy greenishy background. The colors I'm using today are kind of lean more in toward the green. You could do any color combo that you want. These postcards are available in my shop to purchase. They're called Paint Your Own Postcards. On the front, you have the design, and on the back, they are ready to mail. They come in a set of birch trees, and then a butterfly, a lotus plant, and a scripture verse. But again, it's something you can create on your own if you don't want to buy the set. So I am using a medium-sized brush here, and I've diluted my paint with some water. This is Ecoline watercolors. I would use 2 different colors or more. Maybe you want to do a rainbow effect or a different color between each tree. That is up to you. I'm starting with my lighter color. Again, I already diluted the paint with some water, but I am adding a little bit more water to help it spread. Once I've got that light green down on paper, I'm going to start by dropping in some of my darker color. We always work from light to dark in watercolor. And I've said this before in other videos, but as long as your paper is still wet, the paint is going to keep moving and changing. So you don't want to be too precious about where all of this goes. You want to be relaxed and kind of let the paint do its thing. I had a watercolor teacher once who said, don't be mad at water for being wet. And it really works in a painting like this, that it can kind of flow and become whatever it's going to be. So I'm going to continue with this method of adding the lighter green in there. And then once the space is filled with the light green, I'm going to drop in some darker green. In this one, I decided to kind of do a rising pattern. My thinking was the darker colors in the background will look more like foliage close to the ground, whereas the lighter color will look more like maybe the sunshine is shining through the trees. I'm going to speed this up really quickly for a little bit so you don't have to watch me very slowly paint all of these birch tree spots. But again, this is a place where you can really use some creativity in your own color choices and in your own ideas. And remember that the paint's going to keep changing and moving as you go. Now, after I do about half of these spots, I'm going to go back and make a change. And I really like this technique a lot. So what I'm going to do is you can see my paper still shiny and wet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go back and just start to drop some water droplets in, regular old water droplets, to create these blooms between the different colors. So dropping water here, drop a little water there. When I get to those 3rd and 4th spots, you'll be able to see it a little bit better, what the water is going to do. It's just going to kind of spread out, and it will create this sort of light through the trees effect that's really fun and cool. So I'm going to paint the other 3 empty spaces there between those birch trees. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before, where I'm going to drop in that darker color and let it rise just a little bit. And you can already kind of see in those first 4 spots where it looks like some light is shining through the foliage in the background. And those are those water blooms that we created. And now those last 3 spots are going to get some water blooms too. Now you can do those blooms with water and lighten it up, or you can do them with another color of paint. So you'll see here in just a second, I'm dropping the water into these spots, but I'm also going to go through and drop the darker green into some other spots too, and let those create their own blooms. So maybe you want to experiment here and try this with spots of blue or spots of gold or whatnot. This technique works really well when the paint is still wet, and it does not work as well when the paint is drying. So you'll see on this first one, I decided I wanted to add some more blooms. So what I did is I went through and added more paint and a little bit more water to it so that I could add some more blooms. Before you start painting the actual trees for these little postcards, we really need to make sure the paint is dry for the background. Otherwise, you'll get some bleeds in there that might not be as pleasant as our little blooms. So let's take a look at, while I'm waiting for this to dry, let's look at the original again. You can see we've got these blooms in the background. They look as if the light is shining through the trees. And now we're going to start first with the shading on the birch trees. I've got my Ecoline gray paint here. I use Ecoline liquid watercolors for almost everything, unless I'm creating an original painting because they're not as light fast. But you can use any paints here, whether that's a Crayola setup or tube watercolors or anything else. I'm diluting my gray, and this is sort of a medium gray. If you don't have gray, that's fine. You just want to use a black that you can dilute so it comes across as gray. You could even try, if you want to try trees in a nighttime scene, a blue or a purple might be a cool look too. I'm switching to a little bit of a thinner brush, and I'm diluting this quite a bit because I don't want to go too heavy on my lines yet. First, we're going to create the shading on each tree, and then we'll go back and create those little lines on each birch tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my brush wet, and on this first tree on the left, I'm going to fill the entire thing with water. It's not very interesting to watch somebody paint with water because you can't see anything happening, but I'm making sure that the entire tree is filled with water, so the whole thing is going to be wet. Once it's all wet, I'm going to take my gray paint and I'm going to just paint the right side, just create a line on the right side of the tree, like so. So I'm just creating a line. I draw the line first. You can see it's spreading a little bit, and then I'm going to help it spread with my brush too. Again, it's always better to start light in watercolor, so don't have too heavy of a hand. Start light, you can always go back and do more. You can start to see that faint shadow on that tree. And I'm going to do the same thing on all the rest of the trees. So you'll see on this skinny tree that is number 2 in line, there I am. I'm filling everything in, kind of helping it spread just a bit. And on the second tree, I'm going to do the exact same method. So I'm going to fill the entire thing with water, get that entire second tree wet, then paint a line up the side with the gray, and then help it spread just a little bit. The lighter, the better at this point. Always the lighter, the better. You can always go back and make it darker, but you can't go lighten things up. All right, I'm going to speed things up a little bit, but the technique is going to stay the same for the rest of these 4 trees. I'm going to entirely wet each tree, one thing at a time, and then once it's wet, I'm going to draw my gray line and gently help spread that paint around. Now, by the time you're done with your last tree, your first tree should be reasonably dry enough to do a little bit of work on. If it's not, give it a second or hit it with a hairdryer for a bit, depending on how heavy you are with the water. You can definitely use a hairdryer to help watercolors dry more quickly. Just don't go too hard and fast with it, or you could end up smearing your paint if it's too wet. So I'm going back through now that my tree is a little drier, and I am giving it a little bit more, I'm giving each trunk a little bit more depth with the darker line here on the side. You can see on my sample on the left, especially on The last two trees, the lines are a little bit darker. The shadow lines are a little bit darker toward the bottom, and I think they just look fine. These don't have to be perfect. Okay, now it's time to go back through. I'm going to go back in with my Ecoline Gray again. I'm adding a little more to my palette because I want these lines to be darker. I don't want them to be the color to be quite as diluted. Again, I've got a skinny brush here. I switched to skinnier to work with the trees. And I'm going to just go through and create these little horizontal lines going across. There is no rhyme or reason to this. We are just creating lines that go across each tree. I tried to not alternate exactly, but give a little bit of attention to the right and the left equally, and then create some lines across the middle as well. If you look at birch trees, real birch trees, these lines they have in the bark, these cuts they have in the barks are of varying depths and widths. So some of my lines are going to be a lot thicker, and some are going to be very thin. But be patient with these. If you are worried about doing too much, just do a couple and then go back and fill in and take it as slowly and methodically as you are comfortable with. And we're going to repeat that process for the whole card, for each tree. And again, we're going to speed up in just a second so you don't have to watch the same thing. But one thing I am doing is going back through after my lines are created once more with a little bit of a darker gray to create a little bit more of a shadow on the right side of the trunk. I don't do both sides of the trunk because I want it to have that depth, and we have a light source coming from the left side, so I want to keep that shadow only on the right side. But again, whether these are postcards that you purchase through my shop or a design that you just decide to draw on your own, I hope you have some fun with this and create some different versions of it. I've only done these two versions, but now I want to go back and try maybe a nighttime scene with some darker colors in the back and maybe some blues and purples on the trunk and maybe sort of a rainbow forest with different colors in between each tree. I would love to see how those different concepts turn out, and I would love to see what you do. So if you decide to take on this project, I would love for you to share with me what you created. If you are in our 12th and Blossom Art Club group on Facebook, that's a great place to share it, or you can send me a message, but I would love to see your ideas take shape on paper. Again, this is a part of a set that I've created that I'm hoping to release each month with 4 designs. I chose these designs specifically for the new year, birch trees and a lotus blossom and a butterfly and then a scripture verse in this January pack. But I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope that if you create these postcards, you've got someone fun to send them to.